Chosen one. Deep beneath the fractured ruins of the Vault of Echoes, the scholars uncovered a sealed chamber no record had ever mentioned. Inside it rested a scroll untouched by decay, preserved with a precision no natural method could explain. When they opened it, the air thickened, as if the chamber itself recognized the return of something long forbidden to surface. The Prophet of the Veil had written the document in an age where foresight was not a gift but a burden, recording visions that even he admitted were meant for a life far beyond his own time. As the scholars read the first lines, their expressions shifted from curiosity to alarm. The descriptions, once believed to be mythic exaggerations, were exact, detailed, and unmistakably contemporary. The prophet wrote of a figure whose emergence would coincide with the collapse of inherited illusions, whose presence would disrupt structures that depended on silence, and whose trajectory would mirror patterns too specific to belong to fiction. Every line pointed not to possibility, but to recognition. They cross-referenced historical figures, mythic heroes, and legendary archetypes, yet none fit the scroll's precision. The prophecy did not describe a symbol. It described a person. The more they read, the clearer it became. The scroll was not awaiting interpretation. It was awaiting identification. And in the alignment of your life with its words, that identification had finally occurred. The scholars did not conclude this lightly. They concluded it because the prophecy was no longer dormant. It was responding. And the only life that caused that response was yours. If this revelation mirrors the patterns of your own life, offer your $20 alignment seed through Super Thanks. Declare your number of recognition, 111, 222, 333, for 44 or 777, and mark the moment you step into prophetic correspondence. The scholars moved deeper into the scroll and reached the verse that confused interpreters for centuries. It read, "He arrives when truth is buried beneath collapsing ages, and clarity flees from the eyes of the many." Earlier generations assumed this described a mythic downfall or the ruin of an ancient civilization. But as they compared the verse to the conditions surrounding your emergence, its meaning sharpened with unmistakable precision. The Prophet of the Veil was not speaking of an era in the distant past. He was describing the exact environment you stepped into, in a world drowning in contradictions, where information grew louder as wisdom grew quieter, where certainty fractured into endless interpretations, where the lines between illusion and reality blurred. The scroll's ancient words found their reflection. The prophet's verse continued, "In the age when the fabric of meaning tears, the bearer of alignment will rise without herald and without preparation." This was not poetic exaggeration. It was a direct description of how your life began to unfold. People around you often struggle to understand why you saw through distortions others accepted, why you sensed patterns before they fully formed, or why moments that left others disoriented only sharpened your clarity. The scroll revealed that this was not talent or coincidence, but timing, a convergence designed long before you were aware of it. The Prophet of the Veil wrote that the chosen one would appear exactly when the world needed someone capable of perceiving what had been buried. Your arrival did not follow stability. It followed fracture, and the verse that once seemed metaphorical became literal only when aligned with your life. As the scholars studied the next portion of the scroll, they encountered a diagram drawn with precision unmatched by any other ancient text in the Vault of Echoes. At the center of the figure's chest, the Prophet of the Veil had marked a concentrated point of radiance, annotated with the phrase, "the inner flame by which the bearer is known." For centuries, interpreters reduced this to metaphor, assuming it symbolized courage or spiritual illumination. But when placed beside the testimonies surrounding you, the symbol changed from metaphor to indicator. Individuals who had encountered you spoke of a faint but undeniable sensation, a pressure, a warmth, an unexplainable pull centered not on your presence broadly, but specifically near your sternum. Some described it as grounding, others as disarming, and a few admitted it felt as though something in them responded before their mind caught up. The scholars realized these reactions aligned precisely with what the prophet had recorded, an internal marker not visible to the eye yet unmistakable to those sensitive enough to feel it. The scroll elaborated, "The mark is not carved upon flesh, but woven into essence. It cannot be hidden, for it is not shown, it is perceived." This clarified why no external sign existed, and yet the resonance remained impossible to ignore. People sensed a convergence within you, without understanding why. The prophet's symbol was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be recognized. And in the reactions of those around you, the scholars found the first irrefutable correspondence between the scroll's illustration and a living individual. The inner flame was not a concept. It was a signature of the one whose arrival the prophecy awaited. The scholars turned to a section of the scroll long dismissed as too abstract to decipher. It read, "He awakens at the fall of the old system, when the pillars of inherited order begin to tremble and the structures built on unquestioned authority fracture from within." Earlier generations assumed this was a poetic reference to the collapse of kingdoms or empires. But the prophet of the veil had never written about political entities. He wrote about eras, patterns, and the deeper frameworks that shape human perception. As the scholars examined your timeline, the verse snapped into perfect clarity. You did not rise in an age of stability. You awakened during a period defined by the unraveling of long-trusted narratives, when institutions once seen as immovable began revealing their fragility. Social structures, cultural norms, belief systems, everything that once directed the collective mind began to lose its grip. Certainty dissolved. The familiar no longer felt secure. And yet, within that global disorientation, your clarity began to form. People around you often wondered why your inner compass sharpened precisely when the world around you seemed to be slipping into confusion. They interpreted it as intuition. The scroll revealed it as timing. The prophet wrote, "When the world forgets what it knew, the one written will remember what was never taught." This was a hallmark of the chosen emergence, not rising above stability, but rising through collapse. The alignment was too precise to ignore. The timing of your awakening matched the cadence of the prophecy with near mathematical accuracy. You were not shaped by the world's decline. You were timed for it. And in recognizing this, the scholars understood the old system did not simply fall. It made room. As the scholars continued cross-referencing the scroll with the timeline of your life, a shift occurred in the room. What began as examination became confrontation. The evidence no longer resembled coincidence or symbolic overlap. It resembled recognition. Each comparison they made tightened the alignment until doubt had no space left to stand. The prophet of the veil had not described possibilities. He had detailed inevitabilities. And those inevitabilities were unfolding through you. The realization came gradually at first. The scholars noted how the scroll's descriptions, inner resonance, timing of awakening, reactions of systems, the presence that unsettled old frameworks, mirrored traits long observed around you. But the more they examined, the faster the pieces locked together, until the scroll read less like a prophecy and more like a biography written centuries before its subject arrived. It was not predicting a path. It was documenting one ahead of time. The prophet wrote, "He will not know the verses by study, but the verses will know him by alignment." This single line shattered their final resistance. You did not need to seek the prophecy. The prophecy sought you. You did not shape yourself to its patterns. Your life already matched them. Everything you once interpreted as strange timing, unexplained difficulty, or unusual instinct was not random. It was anticipatory design. The scholars realized the prophecy was not waiting for validation. It was waiting for activation. And activation occurs not when the chosen one understands the prophecy, but when the prophecy unmistakably identifies the chosen one. That identification had begun. The scholars reached a passage that carried none of the poetic veils common to the prophet of the veil's writings. It was written with the sharpness of instruction, as if the prophet wanted this moment to be unmistakable. When the bearer's true name is spoken aloud, the ancient record will stir, for identity awakens what lineage remembers. For generations, scholars dismissed this as symbolic language. No ancient artifact had ever been known to react to a name, but the scroll had waited centuries for the right one. When your name was spoken in the chamber, the reaction was immediate. The parchment warmed subtly beneath their hands, not with the heat of fire, but with a surge of something reactivated after long dormancy. The scholars felt the shift rather than saw it. The scroll seemed to recognize you, as if a lock long sealed had just received the correct key. The phenomenon happened again when your name was spoken a second time, more pronounced, more certain, as though the record was acknowledging a familiar presence. The prophet of the veil had anticipated this moment precisely. Beneath the instruction, he had inscribed a line rarely understood. The prophecy awakens for the one it was written about, not the one who seeks it. The implication was staggering. The scroll was never meant to respond to study, translation, or ritual. It was meant to respond to identity. Your identity. The scholars could no longer argue interpretation. The prophecy was engaging. It was recognizing. It was igniting. And the only catalyst was your existence. If the activation described in this scroll reflects a sequence unfolding in your own life, press join to enter the circle of those walking in fulfillment. Alignment is not achieved by desire but by recognition, and recognition has already begun. The next section of the scroll described a trait so specific, so unambiguous, that earlier scholars had dismissed it as impossible. The prophet of the veil wrote, "His eyes will see between worlds, perceiving the currents that guide intention and the truths that linger beneath spoken words." For centuries, interpreters assumed this referred to mystics or seers, but the prophet was not speaking of learned abilities. He was describing an inherent perception carried from birth. When witnesses were interviewed, people who had encountered you at different stages of your life, they repeated variations of the same experience. They said your gaze felt clarifying, as if you understood parts of them they never articulated. Others described the strange discomfort of being seen too accurately, yet without judgment. A few admitted that a single look from you made them confront truths they had avoided for years. None of them knew this was the watcher's mark, but all of them felt it. The prophet's description was not metaphorical. It was diagnostic. "His gaze," he wrote, "cuts through veils unknown to most, revealing what is misaligned and recognizing what is hidden." The scholars compared these lines to the accounts about you and realized the prophet had not been guessing at human behavior. He had been recording a trait that could only belong to one specific individual, someone whose perception was not sharpened by age or experience, but embedded in their very nature. The watcher's mark was not something you activated. It was something you carried. And for the scholars, this marked the point where the prophecy no longer resembled a mythic archetype. It resembled a direct identification. The scroll's next passage addressed something the scholars had long considered too dramatic to be literal. When the written one rises, the shadows of the old order will tremble, not knowing his name yet knowing his nature. For generations, this was believed to be poetic exaggeration. But as the scholars reviewed documented reactions surrounding your presence, the line stopped sounding poetic and started sounding precise. From early in your life, structures built on rigidity, hierarchy, and control reacted to you with disproportionate intensity. Authority figures grew unsettled without knowing why. Environments dependent on conformity seemed to resist you instinctively. People tied to old frameworks responded defensively, sometimes even aggressively, despite you offering no threat or challenge. What appeared to others as unnecessary tension was, in the language of the prophecy, recognition. The prophet of the veil clarified this phenomenon with a line the scholars had previously ignored. The systems born of fear will sense the one who cannot be bound by them. You did not confront these systems. You simply existed near them, and that existence disrupted their balance. The old order did not fear your actions. It feared your alignment. It sensed the shift you represented long before you understood it yourself. The scholars realized the prophecy predicted not your resistance to the old world, but the old world's resistance to you. The destabilization around you was not personal. It was structural. You carried a frequency incompatible with decay, and decay recognized it immediately. Every strange opposition you faced, every unprovoked friction, every unexplained pushback mirrored precisely the reaction described in the scroll. The old systems trembled not because you attacked them, but because your presence made their foundations visible. The prophet of the veil wrote of a group rarely mentioned in other ancient texts, the record keepers. Not warriors, not judges, but observers, beings tasked with tracking alignment between the written design and the living timeline. The scroll contained a fragment that had been impossible to interpret until now. Prophecy alignment, 97% match, rising. For centuries, scholars debated whether this was symbolic, numerical, or entirely misunderstood. Only when your life began mirroring the scroll with unnerving precision did the meaning fall into place. The scholars compared witness accounts describing the atmosphere around you. The heightened synchronicities, the shifts in intuition, the acceleration of events, the sense people had that your steps carried more weight than ordinary choices. They realized these were the very indicators of alignment the prophet referenced. The record keepers were not evaluating potential. They were documenting convergence. The phrase 97% match no longer sounded metaphorical. It read like an assessment of a living trajectory approaching its written counterpart. Rising indicated the alignment was accelerating, not merely present. The prophet had somehow recorded a future measurement. A moment in time where the chosen one's life would reach a level of correspondence undeniable even to those unaware of prophecy. Witnesses often describe you as someone who seemed guided, timed, or carried by something. They reported that events around you lined up too precisely to dismiss as chance. The scholars saw these as the very patterns the record keepers observed. The scroll was not predicting alignment. It was acknowledging it. And that acknowledgement was tied to you. If your life has carried the unmistakable sense of being guided by something older than circumstance, seal your alignment with a $50 super thanks. This is not a gesture of belief but of recognition. Marking the moment convergence becomes conscious. The prophet of the veil described a phenomenon that earlier scholars dismissed as mystical exaggeration. Those who meet him will feel they have seen him before, though no meeting has occurred, for their spirits recall what the mind cannot. This concept, termed echo memory, seemed too abstract to analyze until the scholars collected testimonies from individuals who had encountered you. People consistently reported a sensation of familiarity that made no logical sense. Some said you felt like someone they had met in a dream. Others described a strange search for context, as if trying to remember where they had crossed paths with you, even though they knew they had not. Some felt a pull of recognition that made them momentarily disoriented. The scholars realized this was not psychological projection. It was a phenomenon the prophet had documented centuries prior. The scroll continued. The many will experience his arrival as remembrance, for the blueprint of the written one is woven into the collective memory of humanity. This line clarified why even strangers responded to you as if they were retrieving a buried familiarity. They weren't recalling a moment. They were recognizing a pattern, an ancient imprint encoded into the deeper fabric of awareness. Echo memory was not about your appearance. It was about your resonance. People were responding not to who you seemed to be, but to who you were written to become. The prophet predicted that as alignment increased, this effect would intensify. The scholars confirmed that this progression was already evident in your life. You were not being recognized through the past. You were being recognized through destiny. As the scholars continued to scroll, they arrived at a chapter that challenged everything they believed about selection and destiny. The prophet of the veil wrote, "Prophecies do not choose the worthy. They choose the necessary." This line had baffled interpreters for generations, but once measured against the patterns of your life, its meaning became undeniable. The prophecy had not sought perfection, purity, or pedigree. It had sought a life shaped by experiences no ordinary person could endure without being fundamentally transformed. When the scholars mapped your timeline, they noticed a striking theme. The events that shaped you were not fortunate. They were refining. Hardships others collapsed beneath only sharpened you. Loss that should have broken you instead carved depth into you. Periods of isolation heightened your perception. Moments of collapse strengthened your resolve. The prophet had predicted this pattern precisely. Where the many fall for lack of foundation, he will rise, for his path is carved through necessity. This realization reframed everything you once interpreted as misfortune. Your challenges were not anomalies. They were prerequisites. The prophecy did not choose someone who lived above difficulty. It chose someone who lived through it and emerged aligned, tempered, and unshakable. The prophet wrote, "His triumph is not found in ease but in endurance. For the one who withstands becomes the one who fulfills." For the scholars, this dissolved any remaining doubt. Your life did not fit the prophecy because you were exceptional. The prophecy fit your life because you were prepared in ways only necessity could have forged. The scroll's next passage detailed a phase the prophet of the veil called the era of alignment. For centuries, this section was considered too mystical to interpret, filled with references to signs, sequences, and convergences that seemed disconnected from ordinary experience. but placed alongside the documented patterns surrounding your life. The passage stopped sounding mystical and began sounding precise. The prophet wrote, "He will not chase signs. Signs will assemble around him. He will not seek patterns. Patterns will reveal themselves. His steps will create resonance, and reality will rearrange to meet him." This description mirrored reports from those who had observed the strange timing of events in your life. Numbers appearing repeatedly at pivotal moments. Dreams aligning with real-world outcomes. Encounters unfolding with improbable precision. Choices that seemed small at the time rippling outward into significant shifts. You never pursued these moments. They pursued you. What others called coincidence became too calculated to dismiss. The scholars realized this was the essence of the era of alignment, the moment when the external world begins to match the internal blueprint of the written one. The scroll elaborated. When he enters alignment, the world will feel ordered around him, as though threads once frayed are being drawn back into pattern. This explained why you often sensed clarity when others felt lost, or why opportunities appeared exactly when needed, not before or after. Alignment was not luck. It was synchronization, your inner trajectory drawing the world into coherence. In this era, purpose stops being a concept and becomes a force. And you had stepped into it. In the later sections of the scroll, the prophet of the veil described a transformation that earlier scholars believed referred purely to authority or spiritual maturity. The passage read, "When alignment deepens, his voice will carry the resonance of ages, and those who hear will feel the weight of what is endured in the path he was written to walk." Yet the prophet was not known for metaphor. His descriptions were typically literal, and once compared to the accounts surrounding you, this passage revealed itself as an observable phenomenon. People reported that in certain moments, especially when you spoke with conviction, clarity, or purpose, your voice shifted. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but unmistakably. It became deeper, calmer, grounded in a way that carried more meaning than the words themselves. Listeners felt steadied, confronted, or awakened, even when you had no intention of influencing them. Your voice did not merely communicate. It revealed. The scroll elaborated. The voice of the written one is not shaped by age, but by alignment, for when he speaks from purpose, the ancient pattern speaks through him. This aligned perfectly with witness accounts. They were not responding to tone. They were responding to resonance, the sound of someone speaking from a place older than memory and deeper than experience. The scholars realized that this transformation marked a significant stage in fulfillment. The shift in your voice signaled embodiment. The prophecy was no longer external, something you matched. It had become internal, something you carried. And each time your voice dropped into that unmistakable timbre, it echoed a truth the prophet recorded centuries ago. You were not imitating the written path. You were becoming it. Approaching the final segments of the scroll, the scholars encounter a passage once dismissed as visionary exaggeration. Across the boundaries of realms, a message will rise. The one foretold now walks his written lines. Previous generations assumed this referred to celestial beings proclaiming some mythic arrival. But once the scholars cross-examined the testimony surrounding your emergence, its meaning took on a startlingly literal clarity. The prophet of the veil was not describing an audible declaration. He was describing a shift felt across consciousness itself. He continued, "The announcement is not heard. It is sensed. It spreads not through voices, but through awareness." This explained why individuals of vastly different backgrounds, some spiritual, some skeptical, some entirely secular, felt an inexplicable stir around the times your life shifted into new phases. A quiet recognition, an unspoken certainty, an impression that something significant had begun. People who encountered you reported feeling as though the atmosphere shifted subtly, as if an unseen current passed through the room. Some described it as a feeling of potential, others as a sense of inevitability. Even those with no belief in prophecy found themselves saying things like, "It feels like you're meant for something important," or "It's as if life reacts to you." The scholars realized these reactions matched the prophet's vision exactly. The announcement was not a proclamation delivered to the world. It was a ripple that moved through the invisible architecture of reality. It marked the moment the written one steps consciously into the lines crafted for him, when identity is no longer latent but active. According to the scroll, The world would feel this shift before you fully understood it, and the world had already begun to respond. At the final section of the scroll, the prophet of the veil abandoned every veil of metaphor and wrote with uncommon directness, "The prophecy will not mirror many. It will mirror one. And when it comes, the written and the lived shall become indistinguishable." Early scholars dismissed this as poetic excess, assuming no human life could so precisely reflect a text crafted centuries before its subject was born. But when the scholars compared this final passage to the unfolding of your existence, the meaning became inescapably literal. The prophet continued, "He will not follow the prophecy. He will reveal it, for the prophecy shaped itself in anticipation of him." This was a line that unsettled even the most seasoned interpreters. It implied that the scroll was not an oracle predicting a distant figure. It was a record created backwards through time, written in response to a life that had not yet appeared. A mirror crafted in advance, awaiting only the arrival of the one whose reflection it was designed to hold. As they examined the final traits, internal resonance, unstoppable timing, structural disruption, instinctive clarity, recognition by others, and a deepening embodiment of purpose, the scholars realized the prophecy did not illuminate your life. Your life illuminated the prophecy. Its words found coherence only in you. Its patterns found movement only through you. Its dormant meanings awakened only at the touch of your identity. The final inscription read, "He will not ask if he is chosen, for the signs will ask him." This, more than anything, described your path. You did not chase destiny. Destiny confronted you. You did not seek confirmation. Confirmation pursued you. You did not strive to become aligned. You simply lived, and alignment revealed itself. In the end, the scroll was not a forecast. It was recognition. And you were the one it had always been waiting for. If this final revelation speaks to the deepest truth you have always sensed, seal your covenant with a $100 super thanks. Mark this moment as the recognition of identity, not possibility. The prophecy is no longer ahead of you. It is aligned with you.